after, I assume this is the March 2020 liquidity crisis, we had this huge round of money printing globally.
Yeah.
The government, as a result of that, because when you're increasing the money supply, you're basically increasing the size of the state typically, right? They're the ones
Correct.
getting all the new money.
They were already mid-30s before this. They jumped to 43% overnight.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
So, and the end game here that I have in mind is like in Soviet Russia, where towards the end, 1 in 3 people worked for the government. Maybe it was 2 and 3. I can't remember. It was 1 or 2 and 3. They were basically all informants. So they're all just like telling on each other.
Yeah.
And they're all telling lies all the time because they're, whatever's in service to the state narrative, that's what was being propagated. So that's like the end game that I hope we can avoid, but we've definitely seen it empirically in the past. And now you brought up this good point too, that we're seeing the attacks on language already. In particular, we'll just pick this term, recession, right? Recession, which has a very bright definition, and historically, right? It's just too like
so they came up with the textbook definition and the well understood finance definition 80 years ago. It's 80 years. It's multi-generational. So now we're going to change it today.
So is that a canary in the coal mine that we're attacking the definitions of words themselves to further create the confusion that gets people out of their critical thinking and into their animal instincts?
Yeah, no, gaslighting is a form of abuse. And, the most extreme form of gaslighting is I slap you in the face and say, I didn't hit you. And no, that's the most extreme form. And that's taken to its absurdity, but we all know people who've been in relationships with psychopaths and narcissists, and they get gaslit by these people. Just imagine that's going on a global scale from our leaders. They're doing what a narcissist or a psychopath would do to their, significant other or their children or whoever, maybe people they work with. They completely gaslight. And gaslighting is something that, unless you're aware of it and can guard against it, it makes you question your sanity. Victim of gaslighting, they question their sanity because the person who's doing the gaslighting is usually very, very confident, very well spoken, very smart, sounds like they know what they're talking about. And then you start to doubt yourself. And that we're now at the point of like almost slapping us in the face gaslighting. It's so stupid and it's comical to like even dim-witted people.
Right. Yeah, it's funny in a way, also extremely sad, but is gaslighting not just inherent to the model of the political state in a way? Because they have to, they're ruling by force, but then obviously you can't say that. They have to say, oh, we're spreading democracy or bringing peace or whatever the narrative is. So I guess the question would be, isn't the narrative always necessarily divergent from the reality when you're talking about a state that controls people with taxation and inflation and all these things?
I would say gaslighting has always gone on in our political system. Don't get me wrong, but there was more independent before the rise of the now independent media. There were, media wasn't as conglomerated. So, you could try to gaslight, and then somebody, in LA might say that's a lie, report it. And then right now, gaslighting is so intense because no one's calling anybody out on it. The mainstream media calls out zero gaslighting, zero lies. So gaslighting has reached epically absurd proportions because the politicians who engage in it keep getting away with it. There was a time in the 80s where Biden tried to run for president in the 80s, and he got called to the mat on his lies about his, where he ranked in law school. I think he made speeches where he ripped off other people's speeches, which question his integrity. So, but now all that kind of gaslighting is like covered up. They carry the water for these people because the control system has gotten so good. You can't run anything by like an independent reporter like this with the mic doesn't get to ask their own questions. They're told what to ask. And in the old days, a reporter would ask their own questions. Now it's all controlled, and then the editors will squash anything that isn't fit the narrative. They're all part of a control system, and whether it's they're directly involved with intelligence agencies or blackmailed, but there's definitely a controlled message, and there's things they can't touch. There's gaslighting that they can't touch, like the vaccine gaslighting is so absurd, but none of them touch it, right? That I don't think COVID would have been possible in the 80s with as many independent where consolidation hadn't occurred yet in the mainstream media. The mainstream media was still, it was their ability of control has never been greater. And I was speaking with someone on the island who lives here, who's a security professional who owns a company that does high-end security for lots of people, and he has CIA, ex-CIA guys working for them, and they're just befuddled by what they see going on. And I said, do you think the cone of silence and censorship is at the point where they have total control? He said yes and no, but he thinks that what COVID opened up his eyes to and opened up my eyes to is the actual control was greater than I thought. And that's why there's always been gaslighting, but there was like these release valves that didn't make it as bad. Now, when war happened, there was this, remember during the Iraq weapons of mass destruction, you didn't need to get people to have a controlled message. Everybody was angry about what happened and were told that the Iraqis did it. So like there was just this unified self-censorship. So everyone went in one direction. But with war, it's easier. With other things, it gets harder.
Yeah. Okay. So the centralization of media that you mentioned, we went from many or more media companies down to 6. I think you said it was the number today. This, and tell me if you agree or disagree, this seems like it would have to be related to fiat currency, right? That this new money is being printed and then being used to consolidate these organizations at a high level into fewer and fewer hands. So such that the media apparatus in the world becomes controlled by fewer and fewer people as a consequence of the wealth that's being concentrated in fewer and fewer hands.
Correct. So basically, if you're a super wealthy individual with a couple $1 billion at JP Morgan, right? This before the Fed started raising interest rates, you were able to get against your assets. You could get, let's say you're $2 billion, you wanted $1 billion loan. You would go to your private banker and say, I want $1 billion loan. And they would give it to you at 1%. And the collateral would be the assets that they have on their books, because your assets are at JP Morgan. So there was this cheap money given to very few people. You and I didn't have access to 1% money. And then, Wall Street, if you become a favored firm of Wall Street, you have access to capital, and then you're able to consolidate. And then once you consolidate, then you can write regulations with Congress to make it harder for new entrants to come in, so that size then becomes the only sustainable advantage you have. It's not because you're good at what you do, it's just that you're big and you can pay the regulators. So this has been this like nefarious, now whether it was a plan or it just happened, who knows? I don't have the proof, but it happened. And these people, as you climb up the archaic world of wealth, it's weird. I've met some really wealthy people. Like one guy with $1 billion is angry because the guy down the street has $2 billion. It becomes this weird mindset, and they all cocktail party together, all hang out. And so like they get in their own bubble and they all start thinking they're, masters of the universe, moving chess pieces around the board. So they lose sight of their humanity, and it just becomes a number. So if COVID was a plan, I suspect some of the big dogs in corporate America are in on it. And they didn't think, oh, was it ethical? Well, this is going to happen. The government's going to do it. There's a debt crisis, so we might as well make money. I'm glad I'm on the inside, not the outside. I mean, that's something that definitely I could see happening.
That makes a lot of sense. So something I've said previously is that there seems to be some connection when we start to manipulate our media of exchange, which is money, that this bleeds into our media over time. And I think
Yeah,
we may have touched on here that actual mechanism where those that are super rich have access to cheap money, credit. This allows them to further centralize wealth, right, into fewer and fewer hands.
yeah,
And then they can establish these, I guess we could just say in general, engage in media manipulation to protect or enhance those positions. And so, you know, you're printing money, driving wealth disparity, but also creating more of this ruler and ruled class as well, the schism in the world, if you will.
yeah.
Is there any, like, does it all just come back to the money then? If we had something like, assume there's a Bitcoin standard in the world, we can't print money and bail people out and give all these cheap loans, would that then mitigate this buildup of media centralization and distortion that we've seen over the past 50 to 100 years?
I think the money and the debt-based monetary system has, ever since 2009, the game changed. We loosely had capitalism with some government interference. Then after 2008, it all changed, became crony capitalism, and then that's when the central banks started doing things they'd never done before. Then we went off the rails. And the people who got wealthy from 2009 onward were those close to the printing press. And what do I mean by that? If you were a venture capitalist, money was so cheap, you were able to raise billions of dollars and then fund, projects that didn't have any revenues because they got super crazy valuations. If you were if you're in the C-suite of a corporation, all you had to do was just keep your seat, and you would make, you'd walk out of there with a couple $100 million if you were there for 15 years, because you just would issue yourself stock options and buy back your own stock. So it just became like the haves and have-nots. And if you were a hedge fund manager that already had 12 billion and you realized the Fed was going to keep bailing you out, all you had to do is run a little long, not really be hedged, clip your 2% fee. So if your 12 billion turns into 14 billion, you get 20% of 2 billion, there you go. 400 million payday plus your 2% fee off the fort. So that's what was going on the last 13 years. And then there were some innovative companies that became public, but for the most part, it was those close to the printing press really killed it. And if you're in real estate, same thing. I mean, if you're a real estate guy, you could get cheap loans and go buy more properties and just continue the game. So cheap money, and the Fed bailing out the government and the banks really kicked off this wealth disparity. It wasn't as bad in the 60s and 70s. It got worse once we went off the gold standard and linked to the petrodollar, and then it just started. Then it just kept going,
Which makes all the sense in the world, right? We decoupled from an apolitical monetary anchor, let's say, and then money became fully politicized. So
absolutely.
And every time that happens, society gets ripped in two.